Annex 6 Mandatory Regulations from 1 to 18. Chapter 1 General. Regulations 1 Applications. The provisions of this annex shall be applied to all ships, except where expressly provided otherwise in Regulations 3 to 19 of this annex. Regulations 2 Definitions. For the purpose of this annex, a similar stage construction means the stage of which constructions identifiable with a specific ships begins. Assembly of that ships has commenced comprising at least 50 tons or 1% of the estimated mass of all structural materials, whichever is least. Continuous feeding is defined as the process whereby waste feeds into a combustion chamber without human assistance. Emissions means any release of substances subject to control. New installations in regulations 12 of this annex. NOx technical codes means that the technical code on control emissions of nitrogen oxides from the marine diesels engines adopted by the Conference Resolutions 2. Oxone depleting. So substances means controlled by the substances defined in paragraph 4 of Article 1 of the Montreal Protocol of Substances. Sludge oil. Sludge oils means from the fuel or lubricating oils separators. Waste lubricating oil from the main or auxiliary machineries, or waste oil from the bilge water separators, or oil filtering equipment or drip trays. Shipboard incinerations. Shipboard incineration means the incinerations of waste of other matter on board ship. Shipboard incinerator. It means the shipboard's facility designed from the primary purpose of an incineration. Ships constructed. Ships constructed means the keels which laid for a similar stage of constructions. SOx emissions from the area of means and are where the adoption of special mandatory measures for the XOX emissions from ships is required to prevent, reduce, and control air pollution from SOx and its attendant adverse impact on land and sea areas. Tankers. Tankers means the oil tankers defined as Regulations 1-4. The Protocol of 1997 means the Protocol of 1997 to amend the International Conventions for the Ship Prevention Pollutions from Ships. The anniversary date means the day and the month of each year will be corresponds to the date of expiry of the International Air Pollution Prevention Certificate. Regulations 3 Exceptions. The regulation of this annex shall not apply to any emissions necessary for the purpose of securing the safety of the ship or saving life at sea. Any emission resulting from the damage to the ship or its equipment, provided that all responsible precautions have been taken after the occurrence of the damage or discovery of the emissions for the purpose of preventing or minimizing the emissions, except the owner or the masters acted either with the intent to cause damage or recklessness and with the knowledge the damage would be probably resolved. Regulations for equivalence. So the administrations may allow any fitting materials, appliance, or apparatus to be fitted in the ship as an alternative to the required by this annex. if such fittings, materials, or appliances apparatus is at least if, as effect that, that required by this annex. Chapter 2, the survey certifications and the means of control. Regulations 5, surveys. So every ship of 400 gross tonnage and above, and every fixed and floating drilling rig and other platform shall be subject to the surveys specific below. An initial surveys before the ship is put into surveys or before the certificate required under the Regulation 6 of this annex is issued for the first time. A renewal survey at intervals specified by administrations but not exceeding 5 years. An immediate surveys within 3 months before or after the second anniversary date or within 3 months before or after the third anniversaries of the day of the certificate. An annual survey within 3 months before or after each anniversary date. In the case of the ship less than 400 gross tonnage, the administration may establish appropriate measures in order to ensure that applicable provisions of the ships are complied with. Survey of the ships in regard to enforcement of these provisions and the annex shall be carried out by the officers of the administrations. The survey of the engines and the equipment for the compliance with the Regulations 13 of this annex shall be conducted in accordance with the NOx technical codes. Regulation 6. Issue or endorsement of a certificate. An international air pollution prevention certificate shall be issued an initial or renewal survey in accordance with the provisions regulations of 5 of this annex. These ships contracted before the date of entry into the force of protocol in the 1997 shall be issued with an international air pollution prevention certificate in accordance with the paragraph 1 of these regulations no later than the first scheduled dry docking after the entry of the force of protocol of 1997, but in no case later than 3 years after the entry into the force of the protocol 1997. Such a certificate shall be issued or endorsed either the administrations or by any persons or organizations duly authorized by its every case. The administrations assumes full responsibility for the certificate. Regulation 7. An issue or endorsement certificate by another government. Another government of the party of the Protocol of 1997 may at the request of the administration cause a ship to surveyed and it is satisfied that the provisions of this annex are complied, which shall issue or authorize the issuance of the International Air Pollution Prevention Certificate to the ships, and where appropriate, endorse or authorize the endorsement that the certificate of the ships in accordance with this annex. So a copy of a different and a copy of the service report shall be transmitted as soon as possible to the requesting administrations. A certificate so issued shall be contained in a statement to the effect that it has been issued at the request of the administrations, and it shall have the same force and receive the same recognitions as the certificate issued under Regulation 6 of this annex. No international air pollution prevention certificate shall be issued to a ship which is entitled to fly the flag of the state, which is not a party to the Protocol of 1997. Regulations 8. Form was certificate. The International Air Pollution Prevention Certificate be drawn up from form corresponding to the model given. Appendix I to this annex shall be at least in English, French, or Spanish. If an official language of an issuing country is also used, this shall be prevailed in a case of dispute or discrepancy. Regular, Regulations 9, durations and validity of the certificate. An international air pollution prevention certificate shall be issued for a period specific with administrations which shall not exceed 5 years. Notwithstanding the requirements of the paragraph 1 of these regulations, when the renewal survey is completed within 3 months below the expiry date, existing certificate of the new certificate shall be valid for the date of completions of the renewal survey to the date exceeding 5 years from the date of expiry the existing certificate. When the renewal survey is completed after the expiry date of the existing certificate, the new certificate shall be valid from the date to completions of renewal survey to a date not exceeding 5 years from the date of expiry the existing certificate. A certificate is issued for a period of less than 5 years. The administrations may extend the validity of the certificate beyond the expiry date to the maximum period specific paragraph 1 of these regulations provide that the surveys referred to in regulations 5.1c and 5.1d of this annex are applicable when a certificate issued for a period of 5 years are carried out as appropriate. A renewal survey has been completed and a renewal certificate cannot be issued or placed on board the ship before the expiry date of the existing certificate. The persons or organizations authorized by the administrations may endorse the existing certificate and such a certificate shall be accepted as a valid for a further period which not exceed 5 years, 5 months from expiry date. If a ship at all time when a certificate expires, it is not a report in which it is to be surveyed, administrations may extend the period of validity for the certificate, but this extension shall be granted only for the purpose of allowing ship to complete its voyage to the port in which is to be surveyed, and the only case where it appears proper and reasonable to do so. No certificate shall be extended for a period longer than 3 months, and a ship is to which an extensions of a granted shall be none, on its arrival in the port with which is to survey, be entitled by the virtue of such extensions to leave to the port without having a new certificate. When a renewal survey is completed, the new certificate shall be valid to date not preceding 5 years from the date of expiry of the existing certificate before the extension was granted. Certificate is issued to a ship engaged on short voyage, which has not been extended under the foregoing provisions of these regulations may be extended by the administrations for a period of grace up to 1 month from the date expiry stated on it. When the renewal survey is completed, the new certificate shall be valid to a date not exceeding 5 years from the date of expiry of the existing certificate before the extension was granted. Special certifications, as determined by the administrations, a new certificate need to be updated from the expiry of the existing certificate required a paragraph 2b, 5, or b of these regulations. In these special circumstances, the new certificate shall be valid to a date not exceeding 5 years from the date of completions of the renewal survey. An annual intermediate survey is completed before the period specified in the Regulations 5 of this Annex. Regulations 10. The port state control and operational requirements. A ship in a port or an offshore terminal under the jurisdictions of another party, the Protocol of 1997, is subject to inspections by the officer duly authorized by such a party concerning operational requirements under the Annex where there are clear grounds for believing that the masters or the crew are not familiar with essential shipboard procedures relating to the preventions of the air pollution from ships. In the circumstances given to paragraph 1, this is the regulations, the party shall take such steps as well as ensure that the ship shall not sail until the situation has been brought to order in accordance with the requirements of this annex. Procedures relating to the ports that control prescribed in the Article 5 of this present convention shall apply to these regulations. Nothing in this regulation shall be constructed to limit the rights and obligations of the party carrying out the control over operational requirements specially provide for the presence. Regulations 11. Detections of violence and enforcements. Parties of this annex shall be cooperate in the detections, violations, and enforcements of the provisions of this annex using all appropriate and practicable measurements of detections and environmental monitoring, etiquette of the procedures for reporting and accumulations of evidence. A ship to which a present annex applies may in any ports or offshore terminals of a party to be subject to inspections by officers appointed or authorized by the party purpose verifying which the ship has emitted any substances covered by this annex and violation provision of this annex and infractions indicate violations of this annex is report shall be forwarded to the administration for any actions. Any party shall furnish to the administration's evidence of any that the ship has emitted any substances covered by this annex in violations provision of this annex, if it is practicable to do so. The competent authority of the former party shall notify the master of the ship. Upon this receiving the evidence, the administration's informed shall investigate the masters and any request of the other party the furnace investigations for the better evidence of the alleged investigations if the administration is satisfied that the sufficient evidence is available to enable proceeding to brought to respect the alleged violence, it shall cause such a proceeding to be taken in accordance with the law as soon as possible. The administration would promptly inform the party who has reported the alleged violations as well as the organizations have taken place. Chapter 3. Requirements for the controls of emissions from ships. Regulations 12. The ozone depleting substances. Subject from the provisions of Regulations 3. Any deliberate emissions of the ozone depleting substances shall be prohibited. Deliberate emissions include emissions occurring in the course of the maintaining, servicing, repairing, or disposable system or equipment, except that deliberate emissions do not include minimal release associated with the recapture or recycling of any depleting substances. Emissions arising from the leaks of an ozone depleting substances, whether or not the leaks deliberate may be regulated by the Parties Protocol of 1997. So the new installations which contain ozone depleting substances shall be prohibited on all ships except the new installations containing hydrochlorofluorocarbons are permitted until January 1, 2022. The substances are referred to these regulations and equipment containing such substance to this regulation shall apply. Regulations 13. The nitrogen oxide. Each diesel engines with the power of more than 33 kW which is installed on the ships constructed of the after January 1, 2000 and each diesel with the engine more than 30 kilowatts which is undergoes major conversion or after January 2000. Regulation 14. The sulfur oxide. General requirements of the sulfur content of any use fuel oil used on board ships shall not exceed 4.5%. The worldwide average sulfur content residual fuel oil supplied for use on board ship shall be monitored taking account the guidance of the development by the organizations. Regulation 15. Volatile organizations. The emissions of volatile organizations or VOCs from the tankers are to be regulated port terminals under the jurisdictions of the parties to the Protocol of 1997. They shall be regulated in accordance with the provisions of these regulations. A party to the Protocol of 1997 which designates for ports or terminals under the jurisdictions of these VOCs emissions are to be regulated shall submit a notifications to the organizations. The government of each party to the Protocol of 1997 which designs or designates ports or terminals at the VOC's emissions from tankers to be regulated shall ensure the vapor emissions control systems approved by the government taking the account of the safety standards development by the organizations and provide in the ports and terminals designated and are operated safely in the manner so as to avoid undue delay of the ships. The organization shall circulate at least of the parts of the terminals designated with the parties to the Protocol of 1997 to order the parties to the Protocol of 1997 and the member of states organizations for their informations. All tankers which are subject to vapor emissions control in accordance with the provisions paragraph 2, these regulations shall be provided with a vapor collection system approved by the administrations, taking into account the safety standard development by the organization, shall use such a system during loading of such cargoes. This regulation shall only apply to the gas carriers when the type loading and containment system allows the safe presentations of non-methane or VOCs on board or their safe return ashore. Regulation 16. The ship incinerations. Shipboard incineration, sewage sludge, and the sludge oil generated during the normal operations of the ships may also take place in the main or auxiliary power plant or boilers, but in those cases shall not take place inside the ports, harbors, and estuaries. Shipboard incinerations, polyvinyl chlorides shall be prohibited except shipboard incinerators for which IMO type approval certificate have been issued. All ships with incinerators subject to this regulation shall possess manufacturers operating manual which shall specify how to operate the incinerator within the limits described in the paragraph of Appendix 4 of this Annex. Regulation 17. Reception Facilities. The government to which party to the Protocol of 1997 undertakes to ensure the provisions of the facilities adequate to meet the needs of the ships, its repair ports for the receptions, ozone-depleting substances, and equipments of containing such substances when removed from the ships. Needs from the ships are using its ports, terminals, or repair ports for the receptions of exhaust gas, cleaning residues, from the approved exhaust gas cleaning system when discharged into the marine environment of these residues is not permitted under the Regulations 14 of this Annex. Regulations 18. Fuel oil quality. Fuel oil combustion purpose derived to the use of onboard ship, which this annex apply shall meet the following requirements. The fuel oil shall be blend of hydrocarbons derived from the petroleum refining. This shall not preclude incorporations of small amounts of additives intended to improve some aspects of performance. The fuel shall be free from inorganic acid. The fuel shall not include any additives, substances, or chemicals which either